Vidrine from Lafayette, Louisiana. I am talking to you today because I was asked by the producers of the Coop, who took a little bit of footage of me at the Grassroots Culture Camp in Ithaca, New York, or Trumansburg, New York. And they wanted me to share a little bit of my process in cooking and cooking a specific recipe, what I cooked for the participants of the camp. And that just happened to be a big pork, chicken jambalaya. I also accommodated with a veggie jambalaya there too. In speaking a little bit about jambalaya, it's one of those big meals that you would get not necessarily at home in Louisiana a lot of times. I'm sure some families use it as a staple, but it's something that you get at like a benefit or like a baseball, softball tournament, or a fishing rodeo or whatever it might be, that you could feed 600 people in a day without breaking a huge sweat. And I thought it might be interesting for me to reference a recipe that I used to follow, and it was the recipe that kind of turned me on to be able to cook jambalaya for lots of people. So this recipe was made for, it says for 80 people, but I've fed 100 people on it regularly, because it would be 80 people with a really big bowl full. But I'm just gonna read the recipe a little bit to you, just read the kind of ingredients list, and I might reference it whether I still do that or not. So this is, again, a recipe for 80 people. Would be 12 pounds of boneless pork. It says sirloin. I use Boston butt a lot of times. So pork shoulder, it's affordable, it's always available. And it's lean, it's got some fat content to it that I like. And so that's what I use when it comes to pork. 8 pounds of smoked sausage cut into thin medallions. That's accurate. As far as smoked sausage goes, I'll use a few of the different smokehouse brands around Lafayette, Eunice area.
Is this sausage you brought from home? Is this some of Bruno's?
It's not. I didn't have enough to use Bruno's, but it's Rabideau's.
Okay.
In the Iowa area.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. It's pretty well available in Lafayette. Ville Platte, Mamu, I mean, we come from it here, so it's not hard to find. When I am on the road cooking for other people, that is the one ingredient that I can't actually find in a store other than maybe the Cajun seasoning blends or jar pre-made roux, which is a commodity. 4 pounds of green bell peppers for 80 people, 4 pounds of celery. I don't use celery in my cooking. I'm just not a fan of it myself, but more power to you if you like it. This much garlic. I don't really have a measurement for it at all, but a handful of peeled garlic cloves. Chicken broth, so 6 14-ounce cans for 80 pounds. That's gonna be 10 pounds of rice in the recipe. Use as much chicken broth as you want. It could be bouillon cubes, it could be chicken broth bought by the gallon or by the can, or however you wanna go for it. It's all worthy, that's just flavor. So you could technically just use water, and that's in the process is gonna be how to constitute the pot to make the amount of rice. This recipe calls for rotel tomatoes, which is great. I like to brown it down in there. Include jalapenos, Liam Perrin, Worcestershire sauce, which is important, and a good flavor adder. 2 gallons of water, again for 80 people, 2 gallons of water. That's on top of your chicken broth. 1 cup of seasoning, which would be a seasonal blend. 1 cup would essentially be 1 can. And the brand that I use is Bruno's Bon Cajun Seasonings. So 1 can for 80 pounds for 80 people, is accurate, I would say. They say to add some salt, wouldn't go with it. 10 pounds of long grain rice. So that's the important part, the rice. So your ratio of liquid to rice has to work. It's just like making rice on the stove or making rice in a rice cooker, but it's in a giant form. So some people will use parboiled rice. I personally wouldn't even know what to do with it if it came to me. So I just use regular long grain rice, enriched long grain rice from the store, Louisiana made if I can get it. When I talk about the cooking process, we'll understand a little bit more about when and where that goes in. So, good transition. Let's talk about the cooking process. In the beginning, it's all about chopping. So if you have friends that are wanting to help you out with something in the process of making this big dish, or if you have volunteers at a festival like at the culture camp, then you put them on chopping all of the things. So let's start with the meat. The pork needs to be cubed into 1-inch cubes, deboned. Keep the bones. If you do have bones like inside of the shoulder, that shoulder blade bone, put it in the gravy when you're making it. Put it in and use it throughout, because it'll just have that nice hearty bone marrow flavor throughout. Flavor throughout is what I'm going to say a lot. Chicken, make it small. I like to actually do my chicken first in my big black pot. I'm cooking in a big cauldron. So what I do is put some oil down in the bottom of that cauldron, get it hot, 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 and basically pan fry the chicken that's been cubed. And I only use chicken thighs, dark meat, the chicken thighs. They've got fat content that I want, and if you fry them just right, they just stay together in a little ball. So the chicken goes in the pot first, or the oil goes in the pot first, and then the chicken goes in. You fry down the chicken. It's completely cooked essentially, but not falling apart. It's still in little nuggets. Take that out, put it in the pan, save it aside. No matter how big your jambalaya is, do it in batches, one pot, but different batches of food. So the chicken comes out, the sausage goes in. The sausage goes in, and once I start to like brown or stick, you know, when you're making a rice and gravy for the first time, this is essentially making a rice and gravy, then cooking the rice into it. But when the sausage starts to brown a little bit, I just throw some of my Trinity or some of my onions and bell peppers in there, or celery if you wanted to add celery, just to kind of clean the bottom of the pot. The pot should stay clean at the bottom the whole time, but you're still scraping and getting all the awesome flavors off the bottom.
Here with Joseph Vidrine cooking in Jambalaya. He's been cooking since 8 a.m. Been around.
Veggie jambalaya and a regular pork smoked sausage jambalaya with some chicken for here at Culture Camp 2022.
What year is it?
Is it 2022?
We've done chicken and we've done sausage. We've taken all of that out. It's all got a nice brown on it. It's beautiful. You could eat it like that and it would be perfect, seasoned and brown. You've put it aside. Get your pork going. Do the same thing. Make a giant pork rice and gravy. Make a huge pork rice and gravy, or a stew, or whatever you like to make in a black pot or in a Magnolite pot or whatever you're using. And cook it down until the meat is almost fall apart, and cook it, and then you've browned your meat over and over in there. You've browned all your vegetables. You've got all these batches of food, and then after you've browned the pork a bunch of times, you've made your rice and gravy. You want to start adding some of your broth. Put your broth in, then you have, there's this much meat in the pot, and then you've got this much broth. And then by the end of it, you've added your 2 gallons of water that are gonna go in for cooking the rice. Add your 2 gallons of water, so you've got the meat level, the broth level, and then the water level. And like, this is the top of the pot almost. So this is a big 5-gallon or 10-gallon cauldron, like this big, and you've got it full of meat and full of water, and it's boiling. You're getting it up to a boil now. You're gonna need some BTUs, all right? Turn it up. You should leave the flame all the way up, basically up until this point in the cooking process. You browned your meat, you got it all in the water. The water is bubbling. You pour your sausage and your chicken back in. The water is boiling, bubbling. Then you take your 10-pound bag. I buy them in 10-pound bags because that's what my recipe calls for. If I double this recipe, I need to have 2 10-pound bags, which are, it's 20 pounds. You can get a 20-pound bag. That's cool. But if you have a 50-pound bag, you have to you have to figure out how much is 10 pounds or weigh it. But if you just buy it in a 10-pound bag, you just pour it right in, and it's perfect every time. So you've got, I guess it would be close to 3, but almost 4 gallons of water in this pot, bubbling with all the meat. Pour the rice in, 10 pounds. And then this is where the process starts. Okay, we know how to make a rice and gravy. We don't necessarily know how to make our rice perfect in this pot of jambalaya. So we've added a full bag, 10-pound bag to this 80-pound recipe that we're doing. And We pour it in and let it come to a boil again. It should happen fairly quickly. You want to stir it pretty regularly, every 2 minutes or so. You don't want anything ever to stick on the bottom because that creates burnt bits, and burnt bits are good. Flavor is good, but burnt bits aren't as good, in my opinion. So our rice is starting to cook, and then after, let's say, 7 minutes of it cooking, you're gonna start to see the pot be full of rice, and it starts to look like jambalaya. It really does. And then you wanna start lowering your heat now. It's the same thing when you're cooking on the stove, rice on the stove. You're gonna go finger height, or however you measure it with cups of water or whatever ratios, and math. And you turn it all the way up and you boil it, and then you see that it's boiling, or it's been boiling for 5 to 10 or whatever your method is, and then you cut the heat down. This is where we're at in the jambalaya. Cut it down, put the lid on it, open it up every 5 or so minutes and stir it over all the way from the bottom up to the top, and then flatten. This recipe says to flatten it out on top and then recover it. And if it seems like it needs more water, don't worry about it. Add some water, put some water into it. You can add more water. I would add it in like 4-cup increments maybe. That's a guess. But you can add more water. I actually cooked this for 80-person recipe with 10 pounds of rice. I cut the rice in half and used all the same liquid. So I did 5 pounds of rice in what would have been, what would have needed 10, and it was delicious because it was juicy and it was awesome. So consider that. Anyway, you've cooked the rice down. Once you get it perfect, try it a couple times. I try with a spoon. I just take a little bit of just the rice, and if there's a little bit of grittiness, it's not quite done. Add a little bit more water, let it cook. I'll talk a little bit about the vegetable one that I did. It's all the same process, all the same cooking of the rice process, like, don't be scared of heat process. And but I replaced everything with vegetables. So the things that I use to kind of like feel like you're eating a chunk of something, like eating a chunk of pork or chicken or sausage. The sausage flavor and shape comes from dicing medallions of carrots, and I browned those in the bottom of a pot. So it's all kind of a replacement thing. Same onions, same garlic, same all of those seasonings and flavors, but you're just doing it with vegetables. What I used as a chicken replacement was green jackfruit. If you brown it down in the bottom of a black pot, it ends up shredding up and it looks like chicken. Doesn't quite taste like chicken, but it doesn't not taste like chicken. It's in form, it's similar in flavor. It does something as well. Roasted cauliflower, cut it up in florets and roast it in the oven, and then put it in later, so it stays kind of crispy. Same thing with okra. Dice some okra, put it in there. Roasted garlic again, carrots. You can do anything, but those are kind of what I did for this one at the Grassroots Festival. It's a recipe and development, essentially. Things I want to try are tofu. I would love to put some tofu in this kind of take on a Cajun delicacy meal. Other resources for figuring out how to do this is like, there's a website called like the Jambalaya Index or something like that, and it shows you all the different ratios to rice to water. It's very scientifically done. Maybe we can link it somewhere in the video. The Coop can do that. My name is Joe Vidrine. I'd like to thank Grassroots Culture Camp and the Coop. Thanks for having me. Cheers. Tu m'aides, je suis obligé, bébé. Le taxi